Section 20 of Inca Lands. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle. Inca Lands by Hiram Bingham. Chapter 11. The Search Continued. Part 2. Extremely gratified with the result of our conferences in Santa Ana, yet reluctant to leave the delightful hospitality and charming conversation of our gracious host, we decided to go at once to Lucma. Taking the road on the southwest side of the Urubamba, and using the route followed by the pack animals which carry the precious cargoes of coca and aguardiente from Santa Ana to Ollantaytambo and Cuzco. Thanks to Don Pedro's energy, we made an excellent start, not one of those meant to be early but really late in the morning departures so customary in the Andes. We passed through a region which originally had been heavily forested, had long since been cleared, and was now covered with bushes and second growth. Near the roadside I noticed a considerable number of land shells grouped on the underside of overhanging rocks. As a boy in the Hawaiian Islands, I had spent too many Saturdays collecting those beautiful and fascinating mollusks, which usually prefer the trees of upland valleys, to enable me to resist the temptation of gathering a large number of such as could easily be secured. None of the snails were moving. The dry season appears to be their resting period. Some weeks later Professor Foote and I passed through Maras and were interested to notice thousands of land shells, mostly white in color, on small bushes, where they seemed to be quietly sleeping. They were fairly glued to their resting places, clustered so closely in some cases as to give the stems of the bushes a ghostly appearance. Our present objective was the valley of the river Vilcabamba. So far as we had been able to learn, only one other explorer had preceded us, the distinguished scientist Raimondi. His map of Vilcabamba is fairly accurate. He reports the presence here of mines and minerals, with the exception of an abandoned tampu at Maracunac, or the place which possesses a millstone. He makes no mention of any ruins. Accordingly, although it seemed from the story of Baltazar de Ocampo and Captain Garcia's other contemporaries that we were now entering the valley of Uiticos, it was with feel hags of considerable uncertainty that we proceeded on our quest. It may seem strange that we should have been in any doubt, yet before our visit nearly all the Peruvian historians and geographers, except Don Carlos Romero, still believed that when the Inca Manco fled from Pizarro, he took up his residence at Choqquequirau in the Apurimac Valley. The word Choqquequirau means cradle of gold, and this lent color to the legend that Manco had carried off with him from Cuzco great quantities of gold utensils and much treasure, which he deposited in his new capital. Raimondi, knowing that Manco had retired to Uilcapampa, visited both the present villages of Vilcabamba and Pucyura, and saw nothing of any ruins. He was satisfied that Choqquequirau was Manco's refuge, because it was far enough from Pucyura to answer the requirements of Calancha that it was 2 or 3 days' journey from Uilcapampa to Pucyura. A new road had recently been built along the river bank by the owner of the sugar estate at Paltaybamba to enable his pack animals to travel more rapidly. Much of it had to be carved out of the face of a solid rock precipice, and in places it pierces the cliffs in a series of little tunnels. My gendarme missed this road and took the steep old trail over the cliff. As Ocampo had said in his history of Captain Garcia's expedition, the road was narrow in the ascent with the forest on the right, and on the left a ravine of great depth. We reached Paltaybamba about dusk. The owner, Señor José S. Pancorbo, was absent, attending to the affairs of a rubber estate in the jungles of the river San Miguel. The plantation of Paltaybamba occupies the best lands in the lower Vilcabamba Valley, but lying, as it does, well off the main highway. Visitors are rare, and our arrival was the occasion for considerable excitement. We were not unexpected, however. It was Señor Pancorbo who had assured us in Cuzco that we should find ruins near Pucyura, and he had told his major domo to be on the lookout for us. We had a long talk with the manager of the plantation and his friends that evening. They had heard little of any ruins in this vicinity, but repeated one of the stories we had heard in Santa Ana, that way off somewhere in the montaña there was an Inca city. All agreed that it was a very difficult place to reach, and none of them had ever been there. In the morning the manager gave us a guide to the next house up the valley, with orders that the man at that house should relay us to the next, and so on. These people, all tenants of the plantation, obligingly carried out their orders, although at considerable inconvenience to themselves. The Vilcabamba Valley, above Paltaybamba, is very picturesque. There are high mountains on either side, covered with dense jungle and dark green foliage, in pleasing contrast to the light green of the fields of waving sugar cane. The valley is steep, the road very winding, and the torrent of the Vilcabamba roars loudly, even in July. What it must have been like in February, the rainy season, we could only surmise. About 2 leagues above Paltaybamba, at or near the spot called by Raimondi Maracnec, an abandoned tampu, we came to some old stone walls, the ruins of a place now called Guayara or Oyara. I believe them to be the ruins of the first Spanish settlement in this region, a place referred to by Ocampo, who says that the fugitives of Tupac Amaru's army were brought back to the valley of Oyara, where they were settled in a large village, and a city of the Spaniards was founded. This city was founded on an extensive plain near a river, with an admirable climate. From the river channels of water were taken for the service of the city, the water being very good. The water here is excellent, far better than any in the Cuzco basin. On the plain near the river are some of the last cane fields of the plantation of Paltaybamba. Oyara was abandoned after the discovery of gold mines several leagues farther up the valley, and the Spanish city was moved to the village now called Vilcabamba. Our next stop was at Lucma, the home of Teniente Gobernador Mogrovejo. The village of Lucma is an irregular cluster of about 30 thatched-roofed huts. It enjoys a moderate amount of prosperity due to the fact of its being located near one of the gateways to the interior, the pass to the rubber estates in the San Miguel Valley. There are houses of refreshment and 2 shops, the only ones in the region. One can buy cotton cloth, sugar, canned goods, and candles. A picturesque belfry and a small church, old and somewhat out of repair, crown the small hill back of the village. There is little level land, but the slopes are gentle and permit a considerable amount of agriculture. There was no evidence of extensive terracing. Maize and alfalfa seemed to be the principal crops. Evaristo Mogrovejo lived in the little plaza around which the houses of the more important people were grouped. He had just returned from Santa Ana by way of Idima, using a much worse trail than that over which we had come, but one which enabled him to avoid passing through Paltaybamba, with whose proprietor he was not on good terms. He told us stories of misadventures which happened to travelers at the gates of Paltaybamba, stories highly reminiscent of feudal days in Europe, when provincial barons were accustomed to lay tribute on all who passed. We offered to pay Mogrovejo a gratificación of a sol, or Peruvian silver dollar, for every ruin to which he would take us, and double that amount if the locality should prove to contain particularly interesting ruins. This aroused all his business instincts. He summoned his alcaldes and other well-informed Indians to appear and be interviewed. They told us there were many ruins hereabouts. Being a practical man himself, Mogrovejo had never taken any interest in ruins. Now he saw the chance not only to make money out of the ancient sites, but also to gain official favor by carrying out with unexampled vigor the orders of his superior, the subprefect Quillabamba. So he exerted himself to the utmost in our behalf. The next day we were guided up a ravine to the top of the ridge back of Lucma. This ridge divides the upper from the lower Vilcabamba. On all sides those hills rose several thousand feet above us. In places they were covered with forest growth, chiefly above the cloud line, where daily moisture encourages vegetation. In some of the forests on the more gentle slopes, recent clearings gave evidence of enterprise on the part of the present inhabitants of the valley. After an hour's climb we reached what were unquestionably the ruins of Inca structures, on an artificial terrace which commands a magnificent view far down toward Paltaybamba and the bridge of Chuquichaca, as well as in the opposite direction. The contemporaries of Captain Garcia speak of a number of forts or pucarras which had to be stormed and captured before Tupac Amaru could be taken prisoner. This was probably one of those fortresses. Its strategic position and the ease with which it could be defended point to such an interpretation. Nevertheless, this ruin did not fit the fortress of Picos, or the House of the Sun near the White Rock over the spring. It is called Inca Huaracana, the place where the Inca shoots with a sling. Inca Huaracana consists of 2 typical Inca edifices, one of 2 rooms about 70 by 20 feet, and the other very long and narrow, 150 by 11 feet. The walls of unhewn stone laid in clay were not particularly well built, and resemble in many respects the ruins at Choqquequirau. The rooms of the principal house are without windows, although each has 3 front doors and is lined with niches, 4 or 5 on a side, The long, narrow building was divided into 3 rooms, and had several front doors. A force of 200 Indian soldiers could have slept in these houses without unusual crowding. We left Lucma the next day, forded the Vilcabamba River, and soon had an uninterrupted view up the valley to a high, truncated hill, its top partly covered with a scrubby growth of trees and bushes, its sides steep and rocky. We were told that the name of the hill was Rosas Pata, a word of modern hybrid origin, Pata being Quichua for hill, while Rosas is a Spanish word for roses. Mogrovejo said his Indians told him that on the Hill of Roses there were more ruins. At the foot of the hill and across the river is the village of Puquiura. When Raimondi was there in 1865 it was but a wretched hamlet with a paltry chapel. Today it is more prosperous. There is a large public school here, to which children come from villages many miles away. So crowded is the school that in fine weather the children sit on benches out of doors. The boys all go barefoot. The girls wear high boots. I once saw them reciting a geography lesson, but I doubt if even the teacher knew whether or not this was the site of the first school in this whole region. For it was to Puquiura that Friar Marcos came in 1566. Perhaps he built the Mezquina capilla, which Raimondi scorned. If this were the Puquiura of Friar Marcos, then Uiticos must be nearby, for he and Friar Diego walked with their famous procession of converts from the Coquiquira to the House of the Sun and the White Rock, which was close to Uiticos. Crossing the Vilcabamba on a footbridge that afternoon, we came immediately upon some old ruins that were not Incaic. Examination showed that they were apparently the remains of a very crude Spanish crushing mill, obviously intended to pulverize gold-bearing quartz on a considerable scale. Perhaps this was the place referred to by Ocampo, who says that the Inca Titu Cusi attended masses said by his friend Friar Diego in a chapel which is "near my houses and on my own lands," in the mining district of Puquiura, close to the ore crushing mill of Don Cristoval de Albornoz, precentor that was of the Cusco Cathedral. One of the millstones is 5 feet in diameter and more than a foot thick. It lay near a huge flat rock of white granite, hollowed out so as to enable the millstone to be rolled slowly around in a hollow trough. There was also a very large Indian mortar and pestle, heavy enough to need the services of 4 men to work it. The mortar was merely the hollowed out top of a large boulder, which projected a few inches above the surface of the ground. The pestle, 4 feet in diameter, was of the characteristic rocking stone shape, used from time immemorial by the Indians of the highlands for crushing maize or potatoes. Since no other ruins of a Spanish quartz crushing plant have been found in this vicinity, it is probable that this once belonged to Don Cristoval de Albornoz. Near the mill in the Tincochaca River joins the Vilcabamba from the southeast. Crossing this on a footbridge, I followed Mogrovejo to an old and very dilapidated structure in the saddle of the hill on the south side of Rosas Pata. They called the place Uncapampa, or Inca Pampa. It is probably one of the forts stormed by Captain Garcia and his men in 1571. The ruins represent a single house, 166 feet long by 33 feet wide. If the house had partitions, they are long since disappeared. There were 6 doorways in front, none on the ends or near the rear walls. The ruins resemble those of Incahuaracana near Lucma. The walls had originally been built of rough stones laid in clay. The general finish was extremely rough. The few niches all on one end of the structure were irregular, about 2 feet in width and a little more than this in height. The one corner of the building, which was still standing, had a height of about 10 feet. 200 Inca soldiers could have slept here also. Leaving Uncapampa and following my guides, I climbed up the ridge and followed a path along its west side to the top of Rosas Pata, passing some ruins much overgrown and of a primitive character. I soon found myself on a pleasant pampa near the top of the mountain. The view here commands a great part of the province of Uilcapampa. It is remarkably extensive on all sides. To the north and south are snow-capped mountains. To the east and west, deep verdure-clad valleys. Furthermore, on the north side of the pampa is an extensive level space, with a very sumptuous and majestic building, erected with great skill and art, all the lintels of the doors, the principal as well as the ordinary ones, being of white granite elaborately cut. At last we had found a place which seemed to meet most of the requirements of Ocampo's description of the fortress of Pictos. To be sure, it was not of marble. The lintels and the doors were not carved, in our sense of the word. They were, however, beautifully finished, as may be seen from the illustrations and the white granite might easily pass for marble. If we could only find in this vicinity that temple of the sun which Calancha had said was near Uiticos, all doubts would be at an end. That night we stayed at Tincochaca, in the hut of an Indian friend of Mogrovejo's. As usual, we made inquiries. Imagine our feelings when, in response to the oft-repeated question, he said that in a neighboring valley there was a great white rock, over a spring of water. If his story should prove to be true, our quest for Uiticos was over. It behooved us to make a very careful study of what we had found. End of chapter 11. End of section 20.